With Uzura hath no man a house of good stone, each block cut smooth and well-fitting, that design might cover their face. With Uzura hath no man a painted paradise on his church wall, harpies at lute, or where virgin receiveth message, and halo projects from incision with Uzura. Seeth no man Gonzaga his heirs and his concubines, no picture is made to endure nor to live with, but is made to sell and sell quickly. With Uzura sin against nature, is thy bread ever more of stale rags? Is thy bread dry as paper, with no mountain wheat, no strong flour? With Uzura the line grows thick. With Uzura is no clear demarcation, and no man can find site for his dwelling. Stonecutter is kept from his stone, weaver is kept from his loom. With Uzura wool comes not to market, she bringeth no gain with Uzura. Uzura is a murrain, Uzura blunteth the needle in the maid's hand, and stoppeth the spinner's cunning. Pietro Lombardo came not by Uzura, Duccio came not by Uzura, nor Pier della Francesca, Juan Bellin, not by Uzura, nor was Calunnia painted. Came not by Uzura Angelico, came not Ambrosio Pradis, came no church-cut stone designed, Adamo mi fecit. By Uzura Saint Trophime, not by Uzura Saint Hilaire, Uzura rusteth the chisel. It rusteth the craft and the craftsman, it gnaweth the thread in the loom. None learneth to weave gold in her pattern. Azure hath a canker by Uzura. Karamorzi is unbroiled, emerald findeth no memling. Uzura slayeth the child in the womb, it stayeth the young man's courting, it hath brought palsy to bed. Lieth between the young bride and her bridegroom, contra naturam, they have brought whores for Eleusis. Corpses are set to banquet at behest of Uzura.
Tomorrow, we start at 8:15 in the morning, and that's when we start to give away things we call door prizes. If you are here and your name is called, and it's taken out of the registration box, so everybody that filled out a registration card is eligible to win a door prize. And there are a number of door prizes. That starts at 8:15. Our first speaker is on at 8:30. So you want to be here to see if you win. There are a number of things that will be given away, including each day we'll give away a free admission to the Denver conference next August. So that's a value of $140. And a number of other exhibitors will be contributing door prizes. That's at 8:15 in the morning, and then the program gets underway at 8:30 with our first speaker, Phil Thomas. Tonight, our first speaker is Eustace Mullins of Stanton, Virginia. Eustace has written a number of books, including Secrets of the Federal Reserve, The World Order, A Writ for Martyrs, Murder by Injection, and The Rape of Justice. He's been on at least 50 radio and TV shows in the past 3 years, including Morton Downey, and a number of speaking engagements around the country. He has researched an enormous number of things. He is an excellent researcher. He'll tell you more about how he did that, how he got into it. But we are real pleased to have Eustace Mullins with us for the first time at any of our conferences. So will you welcome our opening speaker, Eustace Mullins, here from Stanton, Virginia. Now, he has a lapel mic.
Does that sound all right? All right. You know, Dean has mentioned that there is a possibility of a bust here. I have to say that perhaps not being here will give him a little bit of immunity, because I was with Congressman George Hansen in Dallas, and there was a group of federal agents who were there to pick him up, and I stayed with George the whole time. And they would not arrest George while I was with him. They waited till the next day when he went up to Omaha to a religious meeting, and they arrested him there. Now, I think the reason they didn't want to arrest George Hansen while I was with him is the fact that I have sued so many government officials in the past. I've sued 2 directors of the FBI. I've sued the Librarian of Congress. I've sued the Commissioner of Internal Revenue. And I have to say that no government official has ever filed any charge or suit against me. I have always been on the attack. Now, I mention this because I think we lose sight of how vulnerable these people are, and how uneasy their nights are, and how easy it is for us to go after them. Our problem has been that they are doing too much to us, and we're not doing enough to them. And in my own small way, I've tried to remedy that, and I've had a lot of fun doing it. When I sent the summons to William Webster, the head of the FBI, who is now director of the CIA, it was carried by U.S. Marshals. William Webster got so angry that he ordered that they change the entire delivery of indictments and summonses by the U.S. Marshals. And from that day on, they were delivered by the U.S. mails. He said he never wanted a U.S. Marshal to come into his office and serve him a summons again, and so that's why they changed the whole procedure. So there again, you see, you can bring about some great changes simply by sticking to your guns, by doing what you want to do instead of what they want you to do. That is the decision that you have to make. You're going to say, we're going to start doing things my way because I'm an American citizen, and this is the way I think things should be done. And it's surprising how much you can accomplish. I did get a $50 million default judgment against the FBI simply because they did not know how to answer the documented charges that I had brought, so they didn't answer them in time. And so I went right to the clerk of the court, which the federal rules of civil procedure tell you how to do this. Go right into the court and file with the clerk of the court a default judgment for the full amount that you're suing for, which in this case was $50 million. Of course, I haven't collected it yet because there is not a federal judge, I believe, who would give me the order of execution, which you have to have, supposedly. I'm not even sure that I need it. At one time, I was thinking of just taking a lien on the White House and charging the president rent. Becoming a landlord, which I've never been, but I think it would be nice to be a landlord. And then I thought the next building I'd put a lien on would be the Pentagon. Oh, yeah. And just sit back and clip coupons from now on. But I haven't gotten around to it yet. But what I really want to talk about is how I became a writer and how I got into the nonfiction field. Almost 60 years ago, I decided that I wanted to write and that I was not going to do anything else, and I really have never done anything else. But at that time, I thought that a writer was a person who wrote creative things. They wrote poetry, plays, novels. At no time did I... Is it under control? Maybe it's this thing. Maybe it couldn't be. Anyway. So I continued in this resolve to become what they call a creative writer until I met an imprisoned poet named Ezra Pound, and he had been imprisoned for political reasons in an insane asylum according to the best techniques of the KGB, which were very much in vogue in Washington at that time, and really they still are. So Ezra Pound, although he was a poet, was very interested in economics. So he sent me over to the Library of Congress to look up something on the Federal Reserve System. That was 42 years ago, and I've been working on it ever since. Because once I got into these things, they were so much more fascinating, so much more involved, that I never again had any idea of writing any fictional work. And as I say, I've continued to do it because at the Library of Congress, there is so much material that once you get in there, and I go right back in the stacks. I don't sit at the desk and ask for them to bring me any books. I get a permit and go right back into the stacks, and I go in there and pull everything out that I want. And I have found a lot of things which were not even listed in the catalog. And some of the best things in my books have come from those exploratory ventures back into the stacks of the Library of Congress. Now I want to mention very quickly something about each of my books for those of you who have not seen them. My first book, which was commissioned by Ezra Pound, was the first and only history of the Federal Reserve System. It was such a successful book that it's been plagiarized at least 3 times. And it exposed the fact that our international bankers conspired illegally at Jekyll Island, Georgia in November 1910 to seize control of the entire credit and money of the people of the United States, which they enacted into law as the Federal Reserve Act of 1913. And they have maintained that control ever since. My second book carried this a little further, The World Order, which gave the dynastic implications and histories of the ruling families of the world over the past 500 or 600 years. Now, interestingly enough, a number of our presidents have come from these dynastic families, such as the 2 Roosevelts, and a number of them have not, such as Woodrow Wilson, Ronald Reagan, and so forth. But we're back today with a dynastic family member as our current president, George Bush. His family is a very esteemed and historical member of what is called the black nobility. And the black nobility, I give their entire history in my book, The Curse of Canaan. Now, my book, A Writ for Martyrs, which unfortunately the title confused some people. They thought it was about martyrs of the 16th century, Christian martyrs. But, excuse me, A Writ for Martyrs was simply the recounting of the various harassments which I and my family had undergone over a period of 30 years at the hands of federal agents. And it included Excuse me, I've had a little bit of a cold. Thank you, Dee. I had a friend who urged me for several years to apply for my FBI file. And I said, why should I apply for my FBI file when I said, I have never been arrested or charged with anything, so what could they have in it? So he said, I think you should get it. So I started applying for it. Excuse me. And in about 2 years, I was able to get it. Well, about 60 pages of this file were memos from J. Edgar Hoover and the other officials in a plan to have me committed to a mental institution, which they never got around to, but the plot went on for about a year and a half, and they never succeeded in doing it. I knew nothing about it for 28 years. So when I got my file and found out about this, that is when I filed the suit, because this was a very flagrant invasion of my privacy and a very threatening thing, which if they had succeeded, of course, it would have changed my life very drastically. So, but as I say, they never got around to doing it. But when I got this file, it was so interesting that I reproduced 120 pages of it in my book, A Writ for Martyrs, and I urge people to use this book as a brief to show the illegal acts committed against American citizens by federal agents. Because my thesis is that you can take this book into court, and whatever federal agents come in and testify against you, you can introduce this brief and show that these are the kind of actions which they are undertaking not only against me, but against anyone who voices dissent in this country. And this is where you begin to turn it around and you begin to fight back, which of course is what I've always tried to do. Now the murder by injection, which is the topic of my speech tonight, is a survey of our healthcare system. Now when I started this book, I started from scratch because I had had practically no experience with doctors or hospitals in my life. And I really had no idea how they operated or what they were up to. And as I got into it, I really was horrified to find out what is really being done in the name of medicine in this country. Now, there were 3 people whom I used as guide stones in this, in my research. They were Dr. Emanuel Josephson of New York, whom I had known many years ago, and he wrote a book in 1939 called Your Life is Their Toy, which was a very early book about the drug trust. Now the second man was a former Washington sports writer named Morris Beale. And, excuse me, and
I have a homeopathic remedy here for a cough.
oh, give me that, because this just hit me. What, just drop it in?
It's under the tongue. There's a little under the tongue. That's
I don't know. No. I hope that'll do it. No, of course, like many of us, I've been fighting a cold the last few weeks, but this one had pretty well disappeared, I thought. Oh yes, Morris Beale, B-E, yeah, that's right, B-E-A-L-L-E. Now Morris Beale was a Washington sports writer and journalist who, when he found out what the doctors were doing, that he thought that was more interesting than any sports games that he had ever looked into. So he started to write about that. And he was the first person, as far as I know, to discover that the Rockefellers controlled all of the major drug companies. Now, when I first read that in Morris Beale, I said, well, this man certainly has done some good work, but he simply is going too far to say this. Now, one family could not control all of the major drug companies. Well, I researched it out, and I found that he was absolutely correct. And in fact, in Murder by Injection, I give the list of officers and directors of each of the major 18 drug companies in the world, and every one of those companies has 2 or 3 people from the Rockefeller interests on their boards. So the influence is very blatant, it's omnipresent, and they do control this entire situation. Now, the third man whom I benefited from was, of course, the late Dr. Robert Mendelsohn, who died very untimely last year. And it was Dr. Mendelsohn who coined the phrase, the Church of Modern Medicine, because he said that medical practice had now become a temple and that its practitioners were beyond reproach, they were little tin gods, and that the people had to do whatever they were ordered to do by these people. He elaborated on this by saying that this Church of Modern Medicine has 4 holy waters, which are vaccination, fluoridation, the silver nitrate, and intravenous feeding. And he commented that as a practicing physician himself, he had found all 4 of these things to be of very doubtful merit in medical practice. But of course that didn't discourage them. They still swear by those 4 things, particularly vaccination and fluoridated water. And one of the last things that Dr. Mendelsohn said before he passed away, he told a friend, Clint Miller, he said, you know, I've had to come to the conclusion that all of our doctors today are nothing but drug pushers. And that was a harsh assessment, but I would tend to agree with him, because what the doctors are doing, they're simply writing prescriptions for the drug trust and loading people up with all these things. And in the Library of Congress, I found some very small, unknown books by various doctors, doctors who were dissenting from the medical practice over the past 50 or 60 years. One of them was a Dr. W.B. Clark of Indiana. And in his book, I found a very interesting sentence. He said, I never saw a case of cancer in an unvaccinated person. Now, he wrote this in 1936. So to me, that was quite a revelation. And other doctors have said the same thing, that vaccination is really a time bomb within the human system that can go off 5 years, 10 years, 40 years after you have the vaccination. You can have this time bomb go off. You could have a stroke, a heart attack, because it's always there in your system. You never get rid of it. And apparently it's always an alien force in your physique. Now, one of the things that I have found in the healthcare movement in this country is that we tend to be too modest about the situation. Some of them call it alternative healthcare. But I say that it's not an alternative, because the alternative really is death if you don't get away from this malpractice of the licensed physicians. So to me, the choice is between health care and unhealthy care. So what you want to find is the health care which will benefit you, and you want to stay away from the unhealthy care and the drugs and radical surgery of the AMA. Now, modern medicine today in the United States is a $650 billion a year business. And it is a business. It's not a profession. It's strictly a business. Now, our new president is very concerned about healthcare problems. He is so concerned that he has chosen a presidential commission on healthcare. And as chairman of this commission, he has named Senator John D. Rockefeller IV. So you have nothing more to worry about, because the family that controls the drug trust is now carrying out Bush's recommendation to improve health care in the United States. So you see, things are in good hands. Now, I was really shocked at how political the AMA was when I began to investigate it, because I say I'd never had any contact with it. I did meet a doctor here in Florida who was so disgusted with what his fellow doctors were doing to the American people that he didn't quit the AMA, he quit the medical profession. And he even gave me his card. He said, "Eustace, you could have my card." So I have a card as membership in the AMA today. Of course, it's not in my name, but I do have the card. And he would not practice anymore, and this man was a very conscientious physician, and I think he could have done a lot of good. But you see, what happens is you cannot be an individual in medical practice today because of the unionization of the profession, and even as a conscientious physician, he would have to go and be on the staff of a hospital or take his patients over to a hospital where he would know personally that they were not going to be treated the way they should be. And rather than endure that, he just got out of the whole profession. Now, I had another friend in Chicago, a very good doctor. We used to have dinner together quite frequently over the years. And he also finally quit because he told me some horror stories about what was going on in the hospitals. He said that a neighbor had had a stroke, a man in his 60s, and that they were his best friends, and that they took this man to the hospital, and all he needed was rest and bed care to see, what developed from the stroke. But the surgeons at the hospital got together, and they chopped open his chest, and they did all sorts of things, and they charged him $35,000, and of course he died. And this doctor told me this almost with tears in his voice, that they would have done this to one of his best friends and his neighbors. Now you can multiply that sort of thing by many thousands throughout the United States to find out what the medical practitioners are doing. Now we have to ask ourselves, what are the achievements of the American Medical Association? What does it have to offer in its defense? The only thing I can find that the AMA has done, it has enthroned a particular school of medicine which is called allopathy and replaced our traditional, natural, homeopathic remedies, which pretty well gave us good health during the 19th century. And they did this simply by the Rockefellers recommending that we radically change our entire medical school structure in 1907. And John D. Rockefeller Sr. appointed Abraham Flexner and the Carnegie Institution to bring out recommendations as to how to improve, in quotes, the medical practice in the United States. Well, they embraced the school of allopathy wholeheartedly, and this school depends upon the use of drugs and radical surgery. And when I say drugs, I mean lots of drugs. I don't mean just an aspirin. So the homeopathic school was replaced by the Rockefellers simply because they wanted a bigger market for their drug trust. And Morris Beale was the first person who pointed this out. And I believe, and I think we can see the evidences of it, that this has definitely caused a deterioration of general health conditions among the American people, particularly in the last 50 years. Now, if you want to look at the historical record of the American Medical Association, it has well, I forgot what they have carried on a war against quackery over the past 60 or 80 years. Now, what they define as quackery is any treatment or medication which the AMA itself has not personally approved. And if they have not approved it, it's quackery. And if they have not approved it, the FDA is going to come and arrest you. And so what it is, it's a federal enforcement of a drug trust monopoly against the interests of the American people. Now, the AMA was run by two of the most notorious quacks in the United States for over 50 years. You had a man named Doc Simmons who came up from Lincoln, Nebraska, and I was in Lincoln a couple of years ago, and a friend of mine pointed out a big gloomy place up on the hill, and he said that is where the most famous quack in American history had his place before he moved to Chicago. And I said, who was that? And he said, well, the man later became head of the American Medical Association. And at that time, I knew nothing about all this, but Doc Simmons took over the American Medical Association in Chicago in 1899. He ran it for 25 years until he got in trouble with his wife. He wanted to spend more time with his mistress, and so he decided to get rid of his wife by making her a drug addict. Then he was going to put her in an insane asylum. Unfortunately, she fought back and she took him to court, and the whole plot was so blatant that he got a lot of bad publicity and he had to leave the AMA. This was the man who created the AMA as we know it today as a monolithic, tyrannical power over the entire medical profession. He was replaced by his understudy, an even greater quack named Dr. Morris Fishbein. Now, Doc Simmons had claimed to have 2 fake degrees, although he'd never been to medical school. Dr. Fishbein claimed to have 1, but he never could produce it, and he never practiced medicine a day in his life. But he ran the American Medical Association as a one-man fiefdom for the next 25 years until they kicked him out in 1948. But even after they kicked him out, the AMA continued on the course which it had followed under these 2 quacks. Now, the present head of it is Dr. James H. Simmons. He was a president of the AMA, and then he decided they needed a really good lobbyist in Washington, and he looked around over the executive staff of the AMA, and he looked at his various underlings, and he said to himself, well, the only man who is really qualified to do this job is myself. So he appointed himself as the executive director, as Washington lobbyist. Now, his salary and expenses run more than $1.5 million a year. He is the highest paid lobbyist in Washington. And of course, he has the limousine and driver, and he has the unlimited charge accounts at the $100 a plate restaurants. He's doing it all. Well, he came to my alma mater, Washington Lee University, last October, and he delivered the Telford lecture in which he said, the American healthcare delivery system in its entirety is absolutely the best care that the world has ever known. The best trained physicians, the finest facilities this world has ever known. Well, unfortunately for those claims, the United States has been dropping steadily in the world rankings of healthcare over the past 25 years. I think in infant mortality, we're now 49th or something like that, and many other areas, we're 11th, 12th. Most of the European nations are now far ahead of us in the quality of healthcare, but that did not discourage Dr. Simmons from making these claims. So, now on the fluoridation of water, that proved to me one of the most interesting areas of research that I got into, because I found some pages from the congressional record from Congressman A.L. Miller of Nebraska in 1952, in which he raised some questions which have never been answered to this day. He said, and this is all the congressional record, he said, I asked this question of practically all of the expert witnesses appearing before our committee. What experiments have been carried on to demonstrate the effect the fluorides might have on older people and those with chronic diseases or on abnormal children? All the advocates of the use of fluorides in the water said no conclusion had been reached and studies were in progress. Now that same situation applies today. They still have no studies and no conclusions on these very vital factors which affect the health of every American who drinks fluoridated water in our cities. Now on the news last night, the newscaster announced that they had just discovered that sodium fluoride caused bone cancer in rats. And this very same thing appears in Congressman Miller's congressional record in 1952. He quotes the Department of Agriculture 1951 yearbook, the work of the pharmacology laboratory demonstrated that the fluoride ion inhibits the enzyme bone phosphatase in young rats and thereby retards calcification of the leg bones. Now they've carried that even further, and they find now that it causes bone cancer in rats. But this newscaster hastened to say that the American people should not overreact to this, that we should remain calm, and of course continued to drink the fluoridated water. And Congressman Miller quotes Dr. Robert S. Harris, the director of biochemistry at the MIT, and he says, Dr. Harris pointed out there was plenty of evidence that 1 part per million of fluoride, or a little more in the drinking water, interfered with the enzyme systems which are involved in the growth of bones and in the function of nerve tissue. So there you have the congressional record in 1952 warning against the system which was put into effect, and the fluoridation has been in the water ever since. And of course, Congressman Miller also pointed out, he was a physician himself, and initially he thought that the fluoridation of water might be a good thing to prevent caries in children. But he was disturbed by the fact that all of the studies which were brought before his committee there in Congress, all of the studies quoted each other. He couldn't find anybody who was doing any original research. And to this day, I don't know if anybody has done any original research. He's,
I think you could have something you haven't added there.
pardon?
When you add a couple of things. Sodium chloride, when I went to college, we used it for rat poison.
Yes, that was the basic.
Study that had done with sodium chloride, if I remember correctly, was 286 parts per million given to the people in concentration camps of Hitler. They destroyed part of the medulla off and got it to resist combination.
Yeah, the gentleman is correct that sodium fluoride has been used in concentration camps in several countries in Europe to control the slave population, to make them more docile. It's also used by farmers to make their bulls more docile so that when they come up to them, they don't stomp them to death. And of course, it makes the taxpayers more docile, and that's the most important thing of all. Now, Congressman Miller says, the dental profession merely echoes and endorses the opinions of the Public Health Service. They have done little experimental work themselves. And of course, that has held true ever since, that you can't find anyone who's doing any experimental work, and yet everybody endorses fluoridation. Well, how did this happen? How did the U.S. Public Health Service become sold on fluoridation? And for that, we have to go back to a man named Oscar Ewing, who was a law partner of Charles Evans Hughes, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court and presidential candidate in 1916. And Oscar Ewing was made director of the Federal Security Agency in 1948, and as such, he was in charge of the Public Health Service. And according to Congressman Miller, Oscar Ewing accepted a $750,000 bribe from the Rockefellers to use his office to put fluoridation over on the people of the United States. Now that charge was made on the floor of Congress in 1952. It has never been answered to this day. Oscar Ewing has never denied it. But what you have there is an out and right purchase of an office of the United States government in order to put across a program which affects the health of almost everyone in this country. So this is what you're up against and what you have to fight in Washington, because this is what is going on behind the scenes. When a government bureau comes out strongly for something or against something, it's because they have been told to do it or they've been bribed to do it, and there is no basis for it except the fact that they have made up their minds that this is the program they're going to have, and they're going to stick by it. Now, I get stuff from all over the world, and I got Mr. Ian E. Stevens sent me this little booklet from Australia called The Dickinson Statement, a Mind-Boggling Thesis, which goes into the fluoridation problem much more deeply than I could in one chapter. Now he quotes or reproduces a letter from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency dated March 30th, 1983, Office of Water, to Mr. Leslie Russell in Newtonville, Massachusetts, in which the Deputy Assistant Administrator, Rebecca Hanmer, says, in regard to the use of fluorosilicic acid as a source of fluoride for fluoridation, this agency regards such use as an ideal environmental solution to a long-standing problem. By recovering byproduct fluorosilicic acid from fertilizer manufacturing, water and air pollution are minimized, and water utilities have a low-cost source of fluoride available to them. Now what this bureaucrat is saying is, we have a very serious problem with a chemical pollutant called sodium fluoride. So the answer to that is to put it in the water. That's exactly what she says. And she's very happy about it, because it gives a low-cost source of fluoride for our city water systems. Otherwise, these companies would have to spend a lot of money trying to find some other place to dump this stuff. So from her point of view, which is a very logical, bureaucratic point of view, then everything is fine. Now, one of the problems as a writer that I've had over the past 40 years, of course, has been not only the federal opposition, but consistent censorship, to the point where I finally had to publish and distribute my own books, which I've been doing for the last few years. And there are many people around the country who try to get my books into libraries, try to get them into schools, and they run into a lot of opposition. So a lady sent me a letter the other day from Tulsa, Oklahoma, and she sent me a copy of a letter from the director of the Tulsa Library System, which said, "Dear Mrs. Brown, thank you for loaning us your copy of Murder by Injection. I asked a committee of staff members to review the book as a consideration for addition to the library collection. The reviewers found that the book is primarily an attack on the medical community, the Rockefeller Foundation, the American Cancer Society, the fluoridation of water, and the vaccination against polio. Based on the reviews by the committee, the book will not be added to the library collection." So this is what you have: a public agency, a public library, which censors books because they don't think that anyone should criticize the Rockefeller Foundation or the American Cancer Society, and they certainly should not criticize the fluoridation of water. Now, what we need to do with people like this, they really should be indicted, because they are exercising personal prejudice to deny the users of their library free access to documented research material. Now, I had another little bout of censorship here, because I do a lot of radio and TV programs around the country, and my manager in Dallas usually sets these up ahead of time. When I come into an area to address a meeting, he sets up sometimes 2 or 3 radio talk shows for me. I did one in Los Angeles a couple of weeks ago, which brought in a lot of attention to the meeting, and the interviewer himself was very excited because I presented some controversial material, and he was very pleased by the whole thing. So Mr. Donahoe set me up with the biggest talk show in the Orlando area, the Clive Thomas Show, which I was supposed to do this morning at the studio at 9 o'clock, because I do them in the studio whenever I can, although sometimes I do them from home on the telephone. But it's better to be in the studio, to have the interviewer right there with you. You meet and talk before the show, and you decide what areas you want to cover and so forth. So I was all set to go over there at 8:30 this morning, and I called the producer of the show as soon as I got into town yesterday afternoon. I came down a day early for this. And so she didn't return my telephone calls. So I called 3 times during the day and left my number each time, and I stayed in my room waiting for a call. Still, there was no return call. And I was supposed to be a guest for 1 hour this morning, so it seemed kind of strange that for them to have their guest for the day and they wouldn't even return the calls. So finally the producer called me at 9 o'clock last night, And she said, I'm afraid that we're not going to be able to allow you to be on. And I said, why is that? And she said, well, Mr. Thomas looked at the book that you sent over. I had sent The Secrets of the Federal Reserve, which I thought was a very innocuous book. And apparently he was horrified by it. And he said, no way is this man going to be on my show. And so this is what the producer told me. She said, he absolutely said, you cannot appear. I said, well, this is very unusual because I travel all around the country, and generally the interviewers are glad to have someone on who does present a different point of view, who doesn't represent any particular group or philosophy, but just an independent person who is more or less presenting his own point of view. She said, well, all I can tell you is he says you cannot appear. And I said, well, could I ask how many people you have refused to allow to appear on your show in the last year? She said, oh, I wouldn't have any figures on that. Because I was just teasing her a little bit. I knew there hadn't been anybody else. And you can have a little fun with these people and watch them squirm a little bit when they want to pull something like this, because they're so used to getting away with it, and they're so afraid that of their jobs and of somebody coming in and pointing the finger at them, that they're always scared rabbits. And so I do have fun with them. But she just said, there's no way you can do the show. And the reason I wanted to do the show was I wanted to advertise the meeting, mention the meeting, you know, and perhaps some other people would come over here and see what's going on here and be interested enough to find out what this group is all about. But she wasn't having any part of it, so that was the end of that. But I do run into censorship, and I find it very annoying because I'm not preaching revolution, and I'm not preaching any hateful doctrines. Now, this man who was very pleased with my interview in Los Angeles, he did get a couple of phone calls from people who said, you know, Joe, I've always liked your show, but now that you've had Eustace Mullins on, I've got to change my opinion of you. And so Joe Crummy, the interviewer, says, well, what do you mean? What about Eustace Mullins? He said, well, you know, he's very subtle in what he does. He said, you've got to be careful of that guy. He doesn't come right out and say what's on his mind, but he leads you into believing what he believes, and this is very dangerous for America. And he went on and on. So Joe cut him right off. That was the end of that. But I do find some very interesting phone calls coming in. I did a radio show in Miami, the Mike Thompson Show, a couple of years ago. And the people who called in were so excited usually that they couldn't talk. They were so indignant and so worked up that they couldn't even express themselves. They couldn't even ask a question. And so Mike would just cut them off, you know, and because some of them you couldn't even understand. But of course, he enjoyed it because his incoming calls, the switchboard lit up like a Christmas tree. So he was in his element because he was having a good time, and he really liked having someone on who could generate that much controversy. And I have never been that controversial in any of my public appearances, but apparently the very fact that someone would dare to appear in public and state their own beliefs instead of parroting something which has been laid out for them by somebody else, it really shakes up the whole establishment, because they like to think that they've got their control, they have the foundations. I have a chapter in the World Order about the foundations and how they maintain this ironclad control over the colleges, the government. Most of your government programs they originate with brainwashed members of the foundations. And the foundations themselves, you cannot be an official of an American foundation like the Rockefeller Foundation unless you undergo the Tavistock treatment. Now, the Tavistock treatment is a development from the British Department of Psychological Warfare. The British Army was developed in 1924 to experiment with shell-shocked soldiers of the First World War. And the techniques that they developed were so valuable in brainwashing that they adopted them for most foundation officials, public employees, and other people whom they wanted to maintain control. And the Tavistock Institute is still in London, but most of your groups in this country, like the Assailant Institute and the Aspen Humanistic School of Studies and so forth, they are direct spin-offs of the Tavistock Institute, and their primary objective is the brainwashing of people whom they need to control in order to maintain a sort of iron curtain over public expression in the United States. And very few people know anything about this. They don't know what's going on. And that's why in the world order I did go into this very deeply to show you just how things are handled from behind the scenes. Now I will take a few minutes for questions from the audience if you have anything you'd like to ask me.
Eustace,
Yes.
there was a study done by the Dental Association back about 76, 77. You check your records. It was done in Massachusetts, in which they did an experiment on the water supply. Both towns had the same water, but one they put fluoride in, and the other town did not have fluoride. So what they found is that yes, fluoride did did prevent cavities.
Yes.
They went further in it, and they found the town that did not have water had more cavities, but their coronary system was far healthier than the one that had this fluoride in it. So there was a greater incidence of coronary problems with fluoride. This was take a look at 76, 70. I've got a copy at the office. I can have it faxed to you.
I think I'm familiar with the Dedham study, and it's one of the best studies that's ever been, Dedham, Massachusetts, one of the best studies that's ever been done on the fluoridation controversy, and he's entirely correct that the fluoridated water does retard cavities in small children, but also it results in a much higher incidence of organic ailments such as heart and kidney disease. And the reason for that is that sodium fluoride is not excreted by the human system. It becomes cumulative, and therefore, as you drink water every day, you're getting more and more of an accumulation of sodium fluoride in your system. And in fact, this was even brought up in the Miller congressional speech of March 27, 1952, the fact that it is cumulative, and that they have never offered any answer to this at all. And this is a very serious question. What do you do about the accumulation of sodium fluoride in your system after years and years and years of drinking fluoridated water?
Part two on that is that I don't know of a village or a city that is on the Mississippi River that drinks the water for fluoride. Because if you get it in Minneapolis, they use fluoride, they dump it back in after going through the sanitation part. How much fluoride is in the water by the time you get to St. Louis? Secondly, they're now coming out, and they do have out contact lenses, gas permeables, with fluoride in them.
Oh, well, that makes it even worse. Yes.
I wonder, your experience, if you've heard of the fact, I don't know if it's the fact, that Sweden borrowed fluoridation from the whole country, and the reason they borrowed it from the country was that they discovered that the World Health Organization studies on fluoridation were all made up, fabricated, were never actually done. Do you know anything about that?
No, the gentleman asked about the World Health Organization studies, which apparently were fabricated. I do mention in my book, Murder by Injection, the fact that much of medical research and scientific research is spurious. A lot of it is faked. I mentioned the Memorial Sloan Kettering Institute in New York, which is the temple of cancer treatment in the United States. And they had one doctor there that he wanted his studies of mice to show a certain effect which they didn't have, which didn't happen. So he painted the bodies of the mice pink and then said that his experiment had succeeded. Now this is the sort of thing that's going on all over the country, because generally it is never, it's not detected, because you would have to conduct the experiment yourself in order to find out that it was spurious. And you know, nobody has the funds, nobody has the facilities to conduct these experiments, so we have to accept whatever they come up with as a result, and that is published. That becomes the basis for the granting of more licenses to the drug trust to produce these various preparations, and then the physicians, of course, know nothing about it. They simply prescribe them because they're told to. And even though the physicians often know about the side effects, they decide to prescribe them for you anyway because it'll help your condition even if it makes you worse in every other way. And they feel like there's a trade-off there, I suppose. But that is the biggest danger today in our scientific community, is the amount of spurious research which is accepted as gospel by federal agencies, by colleges, and so forth. Yes?
Do you have any way to get rid of sodium fluoride in the body? Does anybody have a phone?
The gentleman asks if there is any way to get rid of sodium fluoride in the body. Now, the practice of chelating heavy metals in the body has become very prevalent in recent years, and what chelation does, it relieves the buildup of metals and so forth in the arteries, which greatly improves your circulation and heart problems. But unfortunately, I don't think they have any type of treatment which will remove sodium fluoride, because I think the reason for that is sodium fluoride apparently attacks the bones. It gets in the bones. And I don't know how you would, once it becomes part of the bone structure, I think it'd be very difficult to have any antidote for that.
Sir,
Yes?
my son was a victim of an overdose of fluoride when he was 5 years old. Jackson, Michigan, it was compulsory to have injections for fluoride. Well, the nurse mislaid the records, and he got a double dose. But when he was 10 years old, it attacked his discs and his spine. How were you to prove that it was the fluoride that did it?
That's right. It goes to the bone.
I kept getting x-rays and everything, and I lived in Fort Smith, Arkansas, and I said, thank God. I was a little dubious about the people there, but at least they were smart enough not to pass the fluoride thing.
Well, fluoridation has been turned down in many cities, and other cities that have it have voted it out. Yes.
Is it true that the drugs that has been imposed on this nation by the Rockefellers is refused to be used by themselves in their own medical care?
I think that many of the gentlemen asked if the Rockefellers themselves take these drugs. Well, they would be fools if they did. That's all I can say. They don't mind selling them to other people, but they excuse me. Many of the black nobility still have homeopathic physicians, and the most famous one is the Queen of England, who herself is treated regularly by a homeopathic physician. She does not go in for any of the allopathic school of medicine, the drugs or radical surgery, which you can understand that anybody would avoid that if they could. So I would say that the Rockefellers probably have nothing to do with allopathic medicine, and that they do have homeopathic treatments. The gentleman there, yes.
I got most of your book. It's a pleasure to meet you, by the way. And
Thank you.
It was an effort to get here, but it's well worth it. My question is, speaking of George Bush's, you call it the black nobility?
Yes.
All right. I can't understand why the Western Christian countries are allowing third world migration at this astounding rate, which I think is going to bring down the Western countries in maybe 5 to 10 years if it isn't checked. And they're bringing in a lot of new diseases and things like this, as well as anti-cultural biases towards our established cultures. What would your feelings about that be?
Well, this program is a very definite political move, and they're pushing it all over the world that they are trying to end the reign of Western civilization on a philosophical basis by bringing in these other groups and just letting them more or less run amok in the civilization until nothing is left. That's exactly what's happening in our cities, and this is an ongoing program which is being very faithfully followed by the various governments. I hope I haven't run over.